Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. It's Nurse Richard, the Wax Wizard. Thanks for joining me for this very special episode. Now, this was a really interesting case because I don't know if you can hear in the background. This chap, a young man, had a bit of a giggle. You might have heard that in the background in the audio as that first bit was coming out. A very difficult removal for a number of reasons. It was very dry. It was quite compacted. It was kind of stuck all around the ear canal. I think he does swim a bit, so there's a bit of inflammation there, and it's obviously dried up the ears a fair amount. But this gentleman had learning disabilities. Now, it's really common for anyone with learning disabilities to suffer with earwax, and there's several reasons for that. I'm not going to go too much into the detail of it, but I'll give you the gist of it really. Just before I do that, I think I'm going to move on to the fine-in tube after this. I did find the noise was troubling him somewhat. We did keep having to stop in the procedure just to make sure he's okay, which we do with everybody. But it was a little nervous and a little curious, and kept moving his head quite a fair amount. And obviously we've got to keep this as safe as possible. We did get as much as we possibly can. There was a little speck left on the end after this one. We just found it a little too much when it was nearer to the eardrum. Well, you'll see that in a bit anyway. But yeah, it can be more prevalent. And let me give you an example of how it is in the general population. So roughly 10% of children can suffer with an earwax impaction. 5% of healthy adults, depends which study you look at this, but it's a ballpark figure, and it really varies between 20 and 60% when you're over 65. But somewhere between 30 and 40% of people with learning disabilities can have this problem. There's a few reasons for that. It is very prevalent in people who have Down syndrome, because there can be some anatomical differences in the ear. You can get stenotic ear canals. Stenotic is another word for narrowed. Have you ever heard the word stenosis? Things can be stenosed. Usually you would talk about arteries and even spinal columns. If there's some stenosis, the nerves can't get through because the gaps are narrower. And stenotic ear canals are just smaller. And obviously when they're smaller, it's harder for the wax to naturally migrate out of the ear. So you can get a lot of problems for people with Down syndrome for that very reason. And also, because obviously some communicate in a different way, it's often underdiagnosed, especially hearing loss and wax impactions, because it's just assumed that if some can't communicate as well as others, they couldn't necessarily communicate what the problem was, or if they weren't responding correctly. Some of the carers of those people may well think, well, that's normal because of the learning disability, but very commonly it's not because of the learning disability that they're not responding correctly or inappropriately. It's they're answering the wrong question, giving the wrong answer to a different question. It's because they might not be able to hear you as well, and it's as straightforward as that. So if you are a relative, a carer, or somebody with a learning disability yourself, always a good idea, especially if it's Down syndrome, to get your ears checked just to make sure that everything is okay there. Can quite have typically you'll find lower set ears as well, literally lower, and sometimes a little bit short and curved over at the top here. That can be quite common in a lot of patients with Down syndrome. I probably know a fair amount of that because one of my previous jobs, of which I had a few, which again I'm not going to go into too much detail about, but I used to work with young adults, so from the age of 16 to 30 roughly. For about 10 years I supported people with learning disabilities as a job. My first job was I wanted to be a rock star like you do, like you do when you're 16. So I went to music college, learnt that. You'll know that I was a musician in a former life. Didn't quite get famous or become a rock star. So I ended up teaching a lot of, I taught in schools. This is the bit that when I was approaching with the fine-in tube here, now it was a little bit stuck and very dry. Some oil may have helped, but as it didn't jump into the tube and I could sense he was getting a little nervous and getting twitchy, I thought, you know what, if that's not jumping up into the tube, I see no reason why I should be holding that down there too long with a nervous patient. So I just suggested that they get some oil, just pop that in, some olive oil, just for a few days in a row, and that'll probably loosen it off and it'll naturally migrate out the ear. It could hear a load better anyway. Big chunk in the other ear, as you can see here. Where was I? Yeah, so I was teaching music to children. I think probably when I was about 18, in my early 20s, and then through teaching I met quite a lot of children with learning disabilities and really enjoyed teaching them, because it was amazing how they could. Some couldn't communicate in the usual way, but they found a way of communicating through music, through rhythm, through sounds, through noises, it's quite a well-known sensory aid for people who are not necessarily as vocal as others. So I moved into that full time, and I ended up working in a centre where we had a lot of young adults with varying learning disabilities. I suppose the most common one was probably Down syndrome, and then autism. Worked with a lot of kids with attention disorders, chromosome disorders, different weird syndromes, Fragile X. There was a lot of unusual conditions that I used to work with, and it was basically our job to help them lead as normal a life as possible. If that meant taking them to the pub and having a few beers, then that's what we did. Tried to keep life as normal as possible as it could be for them all. And we stayed in their houses for those who needed a bit of extra support, who had some physical disabilities too. Not always, but occasionally. And yeah, it was a really rewarding job, a very tiring job, I'm not going to lie. And I suppose that's kind of what led me into nursing, that I really enjoyed the caring aspect, the supporting people, but kind of it was very physically and mentally exhausting. It really was, as nursing is as well, obviously. Yeah, from that I thought I really got a passion for this, so I wanted to move into caring in a slightly different way, from a bit more of a medical background. So I decided to retrain as a nurse at the grand old age of 32. Not everyone trains early, realises what they want to be earlier on in life, but I got my calling a little later. So if that's you and you're thinking of a change, you think, oh, I'm too old for that, can't teach an old dog new tricks, as the old saying goes. It's not true. Go for it, follow your dreams. Anyway, I've waffled on as per usual, but I thought you might find that interesting. Now for the second ear, as you can see, there was it was more of a one big chunk than lots of little dry bits. Now it was very dry, that's why it was difficult to get a grip of, and that's why I've had to put some oil in here. But it was a very difficult shape to try and get a decent suction grip of, but with a fair amount of patience and wriggling and manoeuvring, we did finally manage to get this fairly substantial chunk out, and out she pops. It's really dry and hard, that. A couple of little specks left here and there. Going to get a couple of them. You can see how it's not very happy, this ear canal, because it's had this big dry hard ball in it for a while. It wasn't very happy. It'll soon settle down, but yeah, it's a bit pink, but it'll soon settle down. But what a difference it made to him. He could hear a lot better. I know certainly him and the people who work with him were delighted with the results. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, found it interesting. But for now, take care of yourself, and I'll see you soon. Ta-da.